Today's video is one of those research has confirmed water is wet topics, and yet when I've spoken about the fact that there's a lot of online misinformation about ADHD in the past, a lot of people have gotten really angry with me. Research has now confirmed what mental health professionals like myself have been saying for years, and that is that there is a ton of misinformation about ADHD online. In fact, the most popular videos about ADHD tend to be misinformation, and it's creating bigger problems. Let's dive into the research. So first, let's start with the research showing that most of the most popular videos about ADHD on the internet tend to be very low quality. So a 2018 study by Thapa and colleagues analyzed the quality of ADHD information on YouTube specifically, and they found that 38% of them were misleading and only 5% of them were highly useful. 27% were rated as useful and 29% were rated as not useful. So overall, there was more misinformation than accurate information. And also, the more misleading videos tended to have significantly more likes than videos which were highly useful and accurate. The findings of this study were sort of replicated then in 2022 by Jung and colleagues when they looked at the top 100 most popular ADHD videos, this time on TikTok rather than YouTube. Of those, they found that 52% were misleading, 27% were classified as just personal experience, and these tended to receive the most engagement, people just kind of sharing about their own lived experience with ADHD, and only 21% were useful. Non-healthcare providers tended to upload the majority of misleading videos, and healthcare providers tended to upload higher quality and more useful videos. I want to give you some examples because this is really interesting. Some examples of misleading videos were describing ADHD paralysis as a symptom of ADHD, stating that ADHD is equally common between girls and boys and that ADHD symptoms only intensify with the onset of puberty, stating that individuals with ADHD lack object permanence, stating that anxiety shivers, random noise making, and being competitive are symptoms of ADHD, stating that individuals with ADHD are only either understimulated or overstimulated and that they lack dopamine. I'm sure many of you have come across videos like this on your For You page, and there is a real pushback against people who point out, yo, that's not true, that's pretty misleading, that's at the very least an overgeneralization. On the flip side, here are some examples of useful videos according to the study. A video describing that auditory processing disorder can be comorbid with ADHD and that a medical or audiological assessment is required for this to be diagnosed, explaining that individuals with ADHD may need extra time to find missing items, have anxiety about future tasks, and proper treatment can improve their quality of life, stating that individuals with ADHD may have sleep disturbances and comorbidities such as delayed sleep phase syndrome, describing ADHD signs and symptoms as daydreaming, sleep disturbances, and school difficulties, with a recommendation to see a mental health professional if they're wondering about ADHD, describing ADHD signs and symptoms such as needing others to repeat information, forgetfulness, or struggling to complete tasks. So the majority of ADHD information, both on TikTok and YouTube, tends to be misleading, inaccurate, overgeneralizing. But even more recently, a group of researchers decided to ask, what are the effects of watching this misinformation? In just a minute, I'm going to tell you what research has found are the consequences of listening to ADHD misinformation. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Ground News. Obviously, it's really important to make sure that you're getting accurate information when dealing with online sources, and Ground News helps you do exactly that. Ground News is a website and app that gathers related articles from around the world in one place with context about the source's political leaning, reliability, and ownership so that you can compare how different sources cover the same topic. They work with 3 independent news monitoring organizations to rate the bias and factuality of news outlets. So let me show you how it works with examples. A few weeks ago, I heard that a famous TikToker named KB Lame was detained by ICE, but everyone was saying different things about him. Some were saying that he's an American resident, some were saying he's Senegalese, others that he's Italian. It was really hard to get a sense of what was actually true. And as a naturalized US citizen who plans to visit the US in the next few months, a lot of what I was hearing was concerning to me, and I wanted to arm myself with the actual facts of the situation. Well, Ground News has quickly become my favorite tool for understanding news bias and uncovering inconsistencies between news sources. By looking up KB Lame on Ground News, I discovered he's actually an Italian resident who overstayed his visa in the US. And I was able to compare a summary of what sources who lean left, right, and center had to say about his case. case. Using the bias comparison feature, it says left-leaning outlets frame KB Lame's detention by ICE as emblematic of a harsh and problematic immigration enforcement. Right-leaning sources highlight his visa overstay and border rules violation, and pivotal divides emerge over the framing of Lame's departure as either coerced or self-deported. You can also see the bias distribution of a particular topic, so like if one side of the political spectrum is covering a topic more than the other side, which is always interesting because it's like, well, why doesn't that side cover it more? So for this one, 30% of the sources were left-leaning, 18% were right-leaning, and 53% were center. Another feature that I really love about Ground News is it actually shows you your own political bias. Do you tend to read news from one side of the political spectrum more than the rest? I find that this is really important to know because it tells you whether you should be mindful of media manipulation by one particular type of ideology. So for me, it said that 32% of the stories I read recently were left-leaning, 46% were center, and 21% were right-leaning. Ground News is genuinely such an important tool in today's world of media manipulation and political polarization. I recommend it to all my friends and family, and I recommend it to you as well. Subscribe to get 40% off the Vantage plan by scanning the QR code on screen or using my link ground.news/Dr. Anna. Now back to the topic of the video. What does research say are the consequences of consuming ADHD misinformation? So a study from this year, 2025, aimed to experimentally investigate the effects of watching TikTok ADHD misinformation on viewers' knowledge, stigma, and treatment-seeking intention with regards to ADHD. So they sampled 490 participants who were 18 to 25 years old and had no history of formal ADHD diagnosis or treatment, but did endorse 2 or more current ADHD symptoms, often or very often. And these participants were assigned to one of 3 groups: those who were shown accurate ADHD information, those who were shown ADHD misinformation, and a control group. So the results found that those exposed to misinformation showed significantly less accurate ADHD knowledge, surprise, surprise, but higher confidence in their knowledge. This is a classic example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, when somebody knows a little bit about a topic but overestimates how much they actually know about it. Those exposed to misinformation also reported greater intention to seek treatment, both treatment that was evidence-based and non-evidence-based. The researchers also proposed that misinformation may lead to self-diagnosis. An individual views information or misinformation about ADHD online, relates that information to their own experience, then begins to pay greater attention to their behaviors that align with the information online. Exposure to misinformation is likely to prime individuals to symptoms they may experience, thus framing their behaviors in the context of a diagnosis or health condition and over-reporting symptoms. I've been saying this for years. When there's misinformation about things like ADHD online, people will say, oh, if you rewatch the same show all the time, that's a symptom of ADHD. And then people go, oh my God, I do that. I must have ADHD. And then they go and tell other people, you rewatch shows too, you should look into whether you have ADHD. Through repeated exposure to ADHD content online, individuals may be more apt to relate their behaviors to a diagnostic label of ADHD. Remember, some of these things that people are saying are ADHD symptoms are literally just normal behavior, or sometimes just comorbid with ADHD, but a completely different construct, or actually a completely diagnosis altogether. On the other hand, those exposed to accurate ADHD information had significantly better ADHD knowledge, again, as you would expect, and also confidence in their knowledge. And there were no significant effects on ADHD stigma based on which videos the group watched. Also, videos perceived as more entertaining were significantly associated with ADHD knowledge and treatment-seeking intentions, because entertaining content tends to be viewed as more credible. So the implications of the study are that ADHD misinformation may be overburdening the ADHD healthcare system, such as contributing to the stimulant shortage, because people are getting assessed for ADHD who actually do not have it because they were exposed to misinformation about what ADHD actually is, ironically creating greater barriers for those with actual ADHD. Another implication is that individuals who create high-quality, accurate ADHD psychoeducation need to increase the entertainment value of their videos, because that way they'll come off as more credible and they'll also get more engagement, which will sort of push out the misinformation that also tends to be quite entertaining. It's also really important to debunk misinformation. However, the researchers pointed out, a recent study discerned that debunking was ineffective against individuals who self-diagnosed ADHD, potentially indicating a need for proactive measures to emphasize pre-bunking. And like I said, I certainly observed this on my own video trying to debunk ADHD misinformation. A lot of people saying like, well, you just don't know. It's not all about the DSM criteria. And of course, it's not all about the DSM criteria. But when you're literally telling people that rewatching shows is a sign of ADHD, ADHD. I'm sorry, that's misinformation and people need to call it out. So mental health professionals, the researchers said, should familiarize themselves with misinformation about ADHD online so that they can debunk and pre-bunk it. And also they proposed possibly using AI to screen for misinformation. They said like maybe social media can have some sort of AI feature where before you post something about certain topics, it lets you know, hey, like 82% of the claims in this video are false. Can you reconsider posting this? Let me know what you think about that. And then there's one more study that I want to talk about. This is also from this past year by Kasarava and colleagues. This one actually contained 2 studies within it. Study 1 had 2 psychologists with expertise in ADHD evaluate the top 100 ADHD TikTok videos. And again, they confirmed that less than 50% of the claims were accurate, despite their massive popularity. They had amassed about 500 million views altogether. And then study 2 had 843 undergrad students be asked about their ADHD viewing habits on TikTok and their perceptions of ADHD. And then they were shown the top 5 and the worst 5 rated videos from the psychologists in study 1. Overall, the students viewed the top 5 videos less favorably and the worst 5 videos more favorably than the psychologists did. They did view the top 5 as more worthy of recommendation than the worst 5, but the researchers pointed out this suggests that young adults don't always evaluate ADHD videos in a pattern that converges with psychologist judgments. Interestingly, participants with a self-diagnosis of ADHD perceive the top and bottom rated psychologist videos as well as the typical TikToks they watch in their day-to-day life more favorably than did those without ADHD. Those with a self-diagnosis of ADHD also perceived the bottom-rated videos more favorably than did those with a formal ADHD diagnosis. On average, participants estimated a pretty massive amount of the general population have ADHD. They estimated that 33% of people have ADHD, which is much higher than the actual rate. And they estimated that 31% of their family and 36% of their friends have ADHD. And now there is a genetic component, and it's possible that people who have ADHD are more likely to hang out with other people who have ADHD, but still, these are some pretty massive estimations. Those with a self-diagnosis were more likely to estimate a large ADHD prevalence in the general population compared to those with a formal diagnosis. And those with an ADHD self-diagnosis also tended to watch significantly more ADHD TikTok content than those with no ADHD, and significantly less than those with a formal ADHD diagnosis. Again, pretty interesting. Now, obviously, given what I do for a living, I think social media can be a wonderful tool for psychoeducation. It can provide valuable information and tools to people who otherwise have barriers to receiving healthcare. However, I think we need to be mindful that the majority of ADHD information on platforms like TikTok and YouTube is, according to the research, according to experts in ADHD, misleading, overgeneralizing, or sometimes flat out incorrect. A very small minority of the videos on this topic are actually accurate and high quality. And when people are exposed to a large amount of misinformation, that results in incorrect self-diagnosis, the pathologization of things that are actually normal or maybe are attributed to a different mental health issue, an overburdening of the healthcare system, which makes it harder for people with actual ADHD to access treatment, and it further perpetuates misinformation too. Now, understanding how to assess the quality of a piece of media is an important component of media literacy, and I actually made an entire video on that, so you can check that out on the next screen if you're interested. Take care and see you soon.